What I am about to relate to you is my story, but in a way it's your story too. And I'm not sure if this story has actually ended, and even more unsure of when it began. But to make sense of it all, I'll give you some background. I was born in the mid-60s. At a time of great change in the world, there was major achievements, large unrest, and lots of uncertainty. Martin Luther King was making huge strides in Birmingham, Alabama, and I was making my first baby steps in Birmingham, West Midlands. I was too young to understand at the time the call for free speech, but it was to become a defining thread in my life. I was busy reading Twinkle comics and the latest adventures of Nurse Nancy. I dreamed of the day that I too would become a nurse. And a few years later, in the 70s, I had my first real exposure of uncertainty as I lived through the miners' strikes and the power cuts. I remember gripping the edge of the seat, frozen in fear, whilst my dad would go crashing around the house to look for the candles and matches. Being left in the dark was very scary, and they were uncertain times for a young girl. But maybe not as uncertain and scary as it was for the canaries they used to send down the mines in the old days, testing for fumes and toxic gases. But for the most part, I was protected from all the uncertainties of the grown-up world as I watched Charlie's Angels and another 70s TV series you might remember called Angels. It was a group of young women training to be nurses. I was hooked, and I knew that I was destined to be a nurse, and I couldn't wait to start my training. And a few years later I did, and I won my first award for it, and my dream had come true. Our award photo looked so much like the Angels lineup. I was living the dream. I was so happy. And over time, my career went further and it spanned positions across the public, private and the voluntary sector, in clinical, commercial and in management. I also did data analysis, systems thinking and auditing services and databases up and down the country. I had the privilege of visiting or working in different health systems across the world, and the pleasure also of travelling from the Arctic to the Antarctic and across the 7 continents to learn as much as I could. I'm not bragging here, but there's a reason why I'm telling you all this. But as we heard yesterday about the uncertainty of travel, but the benefits that it can bring you, I had lots of fun-filled, swashbuckling adventures, some good, some not so good, but on one of which I had a near-death experience, and that was literally life-changing. And it also meant I lost any fear of death filter. And again, there's a reason why I'm telling you all this. I will fast forward to 2010. I was at the peak of physical fitness. I was going to the gym, dancing and swimming a few miles most days. I meditated, I practiced mindfulness, and I was emotionally and spiritually in a very good place. I had a good network of friends in and out of work and a loving family to go home to. From a human givens perspective then, all my essential needs were more than met, and I was fit, healthy and happy. It was also at this time in 2010 I was working for a primary care trust for the NHS, that another round of NHS restructures and redundancies began. Colleagues who had happily sat next to each other in the workplace, made tea for each other, brought in the cakes and the biscuits, were all now set pitting against each other for the few remaining positions. It was a time of great uncertainty, fear, competition, suspense and doubt. The PCT, as we heard earlier from Sue, was preparing to become a clinical commissioning group at the tail end of 2012, early 2013. And so for 2 years from that last photo, the PCT would need to demonstrate that it was fully operational, on top of its game, and that everything, including its finances, were in order. Staff were put under tremendous pressure, not only to meet the targets, but to ensure that our PCT was the first in the region to do so as well. Pathetic, isn't it? Huge egos and reputations were at stake. Our PCT was proud to, our primary care trust was proud to report that we had met the targets for doing training such as equality and diversity, information governance, that's your data protection, safeguarding. It turned out we won. We were the first. We hit the targets, yet entirely missed the point. In April 2011, having survived the latest round of redundancies within the PCT, I was appointed Clinical Commissioner for Continuing Healthcare. and I was the last one to join the team. Continuing healthcare patients, if you're not aware, are especially vulnerable, and they include the end-of-life patients, very, very sick children, and people with learning difficulties, mental health issues, or physical disabilities over a defined threshold of care needs. And some of these patients' care packages, just to put it in perspective, are about £5,000 to £6,000 a week. I was not only relieved to have a job after months of uncertainty, but delighted beyond words with my new role, because now I could draw on both my clinical and commercial experience, and it felt as if all the stars were in alignment. Within 2 days, the earth shook. Something was wrong. I had found some anomalies. Some patients appeared in duplicate and triplicate, other patients' information was filed under wrong names, and others still were missing. For the most part, the managers or teams didn't know where the patients with learning disabilities were, let alone be assured they were receiving the right care. The only certainty in all the uncertainty was nobody could tell me how many patients we were responsible commissioners for, who they were, let alone where they were placed around the country or what was happening to the patients. The database didn't add up, and neither did the patients' records or paperwork. Files, contracts and patients would disappear. Raising the alarm proved futile. Groupthink, as we heard yesterday, had set in, resulting in responses ranging from ignorance and denial of a problem to turning a blind eye and then stating that I was in fact the problem and that I didn't know how to use a database. What they'd forgotten, and as you remember I said earlier, was I had done auditing and data analysis up and down the country for a few years beforehand. I knew what I was looking at. We were heading for trouble as well as the patients. I voiced my concerns, and I was bullied and ostracised and belittled and sidestepped. And then to the point I started to doubt myself and check and double check everything, but I still couldn't get it to add up. I couldn't trust the data, what I was seeing or what I was being told. I continually voiced concerns. My heart was in my mouth at this point. I asked for help, I wrote emails, I wrote reports, I sent alerts, but groupthink was embedded. I asked for time to put it right, and until eventually, many months later, the evidence was insurmountable. The exercise we were trying to do was because the GPs were forming under a clinical commissioning group. What we didn't know at the time was what patients belonged to which GP. It's that basic. There was no escaping it. Through a separate data mining exercise, we attempted to do a best guesstimate of how many patients we should have. All of our patients, because of continuing care and because of the size of their packages, are on named basis. It's not like I did commissioning of dental services across London. I couldn't hope to know everybody's name. But these patients, you have to. But can you imagine doing a best guesstimate to find out how many patients we were responsible for and we were paying for? And imagine if you were that patient or the relative of the patient lost in the system. Eventually, it transpired about 2/3 of our most vulnerable patients were in fact dead, the majority of whom hadn't been reviewed, nor the invoices processed for years. There were patients unaccounted for, lost around the country, and there were daily breaches in governance and patient data and confidentiality. If we didn't know who or where our patients were, how could we possibly know if they were safe and receiving the correct care? And you wonder why abuse happens in nursing homes if the commissioners don't know where their patients are. If things were bad for me before others in the team woke up to the fact, it was far worse after. I was threatened and intimidated to the point that I was scared to sit at my desk alone with some of them. I was being set up, shouted at, screamed at in an open plan office. Tension was high as some were worried the anomalies would expose them. For the first time in my life, I had severe stress symptoms, including heart palpitations when going to work. I hadn't had a day off sick for 7 years before that. I eventually raised a grievance, which triggered a whistleblow, and then I was signed off with work-related ill health. I didn't know which way to turn or who to turn to for help. I was becoming lost within myself. But the threats didn't stop there. In fact, it became a lot worse and a lot more unsafe. It was the cumulative, uncertain drip, drip, drip of bullying and intimidation that took its toll on me. This in turn caused sleep deprivation, which impacted on all aspects of my life. Everything was in a state of limbo, uncertainty, chaos, incompetence. All control was taken from me as I was left waiting for pseudo-investigations and false reports or meetings. And it was scary and unsafe to be at work because I was being framed and set up, but it was unsafe to be off work as well. Management wrote to me stating that I had to inform them of my whereabouts at all times and give them the contact details of whoever I was with whenever I wasn't at my own home. It was like being on a curfew and monitored at all times. And remember, I'd done nothing wrong. All I'd asked was, who are our patients and where are they? But I gave managers and HR so many face-saving opportunities. I used to be a bit of a people pleaser. Oh God, no, not now. Not now. Our meetings had the feel of the Mad Hatter's Tea Party and nothing made sense. I saw mouths were moving and voices contradicted the words, and then the words contradicted the minutes that would follow afterwards. There were lots of dead ends, dangling carrots and false promises, as well as a clear message, shut up and stay silent. I was kept in a constant state of powerlessness, of uncertainty and of not knowing. And I would wake in the morning and not knowing if I'd actually make it to the end of the day. Remember that near-death experience I had years ago? I have no fear of dying, but I did have a fear of living. I reached the point where I barely recognised myself in the mirror because I had changed so much. How much more could I take, and who was I becoming? But it didn't stop there. I was hung out to dry. The tactics that were used against me were like a modern-day ducking stool. All the meetings and quasi-investigations, they acted like a smokescreen, a waiting game, and a means by which to keep me out of the office and delay the evidence being revealed before the PCT could become a clinical commissioning group. What I and others didn't realise at the time was once the PCT became a CCG, these words are as nonsense as the organisations, but once they became a CCG, they would not be regulated by anybody, and no one would have the authority to stop the cover-up. Therefore, the stakes were very high to keep me quiet. I had good reason to be scared because there were no safety nets, no restraining orders, no protection and very little support. I was so scared going into the meetings that I recorded a couple of them. Unaware of this, managers yet again lied and falsified the minutes of the meetings. When I queried them, informing them of the recordings, they tried to sanction me then for gross misconduct. So it's okay for the management and HR to lie, but not for me to prove with hard evidence that they were. The term gaslighting, as we heard yesterday, comes from the old 1940s black and white film where a man cruelly manipulates his wife to make her think that she's going mad so that he can cover up his guilty affair. But gaslighting is a cruel form of manipulation that sows seeds of doubt and makes you feel like you're losing your mind. You question your memory, your perception, your sanity, your reality. And it's now become a recognised phenomena amongst whistleblowers. In my case, there was so much duplicity, it was almost impossible to know who was on my side and who wasn't. My union, which should have been supporting and advising me, kept silent in meetings and they didn't make notes. That's a bit strange. They discreetly advised me to keep quiet about the whistleblow and let it go in case I annoyed the chief exec. It's so bizarre, you can say, no, it can't happen. But they were also that stupid, they put it in writing. It was only later, through synchronicity, I found out not only were the union representing me, but they were also representing senior managers at the same time, without declaring the conflict of interest. One of the managers was also an advisor and an editor for the union as well. How could I know who was on my side? And being kept in the dark was scary. What I've also found out since is because they've got, the union has got Royal College status, it means nobody regulates them. There is no comeback on them. I tried to shield my family who lived 100 miles away from the angst and the turmoil my life had sunk to. I pretended everything was normal when clearly it wasn't. They guessed something was wrong, but in their wildest nightmare, they couldn't imagine the abuse and the detriment that their daughter was receiving. How could I tell them I was brought into meetings and not allowed to leave the room for a break? And if I tried to, it would be deemed I was going against management, and it would be a disciplinary offence. I was shouted at, lied to, given 2 days' notice that my salary would be cut in half, so no notice to get my finances in order, and I was given no notice at all that my salary was stopped altogether over Christmas. So I had no income, no hope or prospects. Eventually, when the stress and the possibility of not surviving was obvious to all, I told my family, and it was a relief in some way, but then they hurt for me so badly it was painful for everyone. But at least they knew what was going on, but now they were even more helpless. There was nothing they could do to stop it. Old Florence Nightingale said something like the hospital should do the patient no harm. I bet old Flossie never dreamed that one day we'd be saying the hospital should do the staff no harm. Eventually, there was no other option but to take the clinical commissioning group to an employment tribunal. The threats and the bullying and intimidation increased phenomenally then. Due to the number and severity of issues, my case went back to court 3 times. I didn't have the financial means like the powerful tax-funded NHS body, so I had to go it alone and represent myself, and it was frightening. Appearing in front of the judge, and the CCG paid for an army of legals to sit in the back of the court to intimidate me and my friend. I couldn't bring my family to a spectacle like that, could I? And the irony is, I and other whistleblowers, we can't afford legal representation. So as a taxpayer, I was paying for theirs. So I was paying to be beaten up by their barrister, and I couldn't afford one for myself. Whilst I knew the stakes were high, I hadn't fully realised what the game was. I had gone to court to expose the truth, but they had gone to win. And they're very different agendas, and the foul play continued. During this time, again, I was ostracised and shunned. My friends and colleagues were scared to talk to me in case it came back on them. I had to hold on to the painful memories because the case was going to court 3 times. So any sleep that I did get, I couldn't lay those memories to rest. I was threatened with legal costs of over 200,000 if I pursued the case and didn't shut up. I said they must do what's in the public interest, and reminded them I still held all the original documents, the documents that they had withheld from NHS England, Department of Health, the investigators, the courts, and I had all the backup recordings of all the lies, and I would put them out in the public domain, so that would be in the public interest, to let the public know just what you are paying for. They didn't threaten me again. And that's the game that's being played out. Whistleblowers commonly come out of tribunals fighting for patients' rights and patient interests far worse than they go in. By self-representing without being legally trained, despite all the hard evidence in black and white, I saved every letter, email, report you can think of. My words and any whistleblower's words are twisted, distorted, and a new history and version of events is recorded. It really does mess up the mind. I realised, again, me and the CCG had played the same game but different rules. I went to court to reveal the truth. They went to win. They won. But they didn't, not really, because nobody wins in these cases, most especially the patients or you, the public, who pay the price. I was no competition for their Harvard and Oxford educated barristers. And you can see the state I'm in now. You can imagine, but I gave it as good as I got. I gave them a fight 3 times. During this time, no wonder I had to resign under constructive dismissal, as it was unsafe and intolerable to continue working. Could it get any worse? It did. Later, it became apparent I was blacklisted, so it would be nigh on impossible to get another job. I did get job offers, but they were rescinded. I got a job offer at CQC. Then they found out I was a whistleblower, so my permanent job became a 3-month temporary contract to get over the hurdle of blacklisting. But anyway, for the 3 months, and they did extend it because they saw I wasn't a threat to them, I managed a team of inspectors who would go out and inspect the GPs. So I know just what it takes to get an outstanding for a GP practice. So Sue, well done. Responding to uncertainty when it's an act of God or something out of your control is one thing, but when uncertainty is being engineered to keep you in the dark, it's very different. It's said the NHS is complicated or complex. I challenge that. I don't think so. The NHS closed ranks and delayed, withheld and covered up facts and reports, and it's what made the NHS, in my case, resilient. During this whole period, as I tried to raise the alarm and ask for help, I was bounced across approximately 50 layers of management and NHS organisational bodies. I didn't know there was that many, but each one passed the book and myself and the case of patients to another department. No one knew who regulated the clinical commissioning groups, not even the Department of Health. An abridged diagram, as you see here, of my case was published in the Sir Francis Speak Up report. Private Eye later picked up my story, and within a week of their publishing it, I lost the hard-earned temporary contract that it had taken me over a year to get. I learned the NHS's resilience was my uncertainty. But I also realised my resilience was their uncertainty. The managers and HR had underestimated me, and so had I. I had to keep going, not for my sake or that of my family, but each day I would pick a name off the list and say to myself, today, Ethel, this is for you. The next day I would pick someone else's name off the list and say, Harold, today is yours. The next day I'd do it for the next person and the next and the next, and it kept me going. To cope, I have to take some form of control back for myself. For instance, even though I was struggling, when I'd go home, I'd try and walk the dogs. I tried to focus and be mindful. But due to the tension, I had such severe pains in my legs and body that I could barely walk some days. So my usual resource of going to the gym and swimming was getting harder and harder, and then I had no money or a job to be able to pay for it. So I had to find my resilience elsewhere. And I think you'd need to develop a skin as thick as a rhino's to withstand the names and the doubts and the slander and the defamation to you. But my resilience also came from having built up that breadth of experience and exposure to new challenges I mentioned at the very beginning. Because I'd worked across data analysis, I'd worked in systems, I'd worked up and down the country, I'd worked across the world, all that travel and all those little events that you can bypass every day, actually that's building up your exposure, and that's your resilience, I think, for the future. All those swashbuckling adventures, some of them good, some not so good, actually was that my testing ground for what was to become. All I do know is I couldn't have made it without my family and my true friends and my little furry friends. The dog didn't pose for this, by the way. It's a bit of that'd be one clever pooch. But the persistence and perseverance I developed surprised me. But I have never felt so true about something or so passionately and intensely about anything that I had to keep going. I liken whistleblowers now to being the canaries of the workforce. You're testing out the toxicity of the organisation before others dare to follow suit. And mistreating whistleblowers is a false economy, and it weakens the organisation's resilience because it means other staff get a feel for what could lie ahead of them if they dare to speak up. But what the whistleblower has in fact done is test the resilience of the organisation. Is it as well oiled and running and as precisely tuned as it likes to think it is? Organisations are at risk if in their attempts to spring back and be resilient, if they spring back too quickly from a whistleblow concern and they shoot the messenger, for they miss the opportunity for change and openness. Like pulling out the winder there, I think they need to pause, stop and to breathe. I said before, I don't think the NHS is complicated or complex. I think it's chaos. And we've now tipped further down the arc, as was demonstrated by Ivan yesterday. In my case, trying to destroy me and cover over the whistleblow and trying to spring back too soon and operate business as usual, it looks like the CCG have got away with it. But what it has also exposed is the chaos within the greater system. And if that is resilience, what is the cost to us? And what is the cost to those patients? In 2014, I had been bounced across nearly 50 organisations or layers of management, pure chaos. By December 2017, nearly 7 years after, and that's how long my case has been going on, 2017, December there, I, in this case, have been kicked and bounced across approximately 80 layers of management and organisations involving approximately 500 staff. At what cost and to whom? Well, the cost is approximately now about £1 million. And I bet none of you had even heard of me before yesterday. And that's just one case and £1 million gone. Who is counting the cost of all this? And what is the true cost to you, to me, to the patients, to the NHS and society? And how many doctors, nurses, therapists and mental health services could you buy for £1 million alone? And that is just one case. How many hip operations and cataract operations could you get for that? So I do wonder, is there a downside to organisational resilience? And whilst I recognise the need for and benefits of risk assessments, tick boxes, policies, processes, targets and all the rest, trying to pin everything down to certainty, and assurances when life isn't like that is a bit of a conundrum. Einstein said, and I'll paraphrase, that you can't solve a problem on the level it occurs. Then I don't think organisational resilience will come from doing another restructure, merger, redundancies or pay freezes. We have to go to a higher level, and I think that's by living and breathing core values. Organisations can either ignore or explore whistleblows, but the issues won't disappear. The evidence might, but that's another story. Well, this has certainly been another swashbuckling adventure in my life for 7 years. I'm not sure if it's the uncertainty of resilience or the resilience of uncertainty that has fueled me. But regardless, I do believe uncertainty can show us the way to truth and love and authenticity, and also to a deeper, richer world beyond. I went to the depths of hell through this, but I also felt the heights and the essence of origin. I also realised that the road to recovery, forgiveness and healing and enabling to make me move on and past this is still work in progress, because some days I could combust with the injustice of it all, and to think as a taxpayer I'm still paying for it to go on. To be truly resilient, I believe organisations need to ensure that all their staff are on board, flying in the same direction, looking out for signs, alerting them to what may be happening or if they're going off course. But for me, on a better note, I'm starting to get my life back on course again. And this 7-year journey of uncertainty has been long and fraught. I was about 4 or 5 stone lighter, fitter and healthier and more energetic when all this began. But I've recently started a health and fitness programme, and I'm beginning to feel better already for it. And after 3 years of no work or income, in January I relocated for another fresh start, and I've now been appointed a Freedom to Speak Up Guardian, the go-to person in an organisation if somebody wants to speak up or whistleblow or raise concerns. Then they come to me, and my role is to listen and support staff and signpost them and their concerns to the right channel so that they don't go through such hideousness as that. I'm beginning to go out again, and recently I joined Shine, an amazing local gospel choir, and we meet once a week to sing. I can't recommend this enough. These people are just, as you can see, it's rough and ready, and there's a teapot there, and the biscuits are thrown on the table. There is nothing fancy about this or the people about it. They are so down to earth. There's no bullshit, there's no nothing. They don't know my story, but they do know I'm there to sing along with them, and I'm finally beginning to find my voice again. So I realise I need to let go of all the... I won't sing or you'll be humming it all day. But, I need to let go of the fear, the pain, the uncertainty, the injustice, because it's nearly drowned me over the 7 years. It's drowned the patients, but it's nearly drowned me in the process. And it is time to let go, let it go and let it go. So what I relate to you is my story, but in a way it's your story too. I am not sure if this story has actually ended, and even more unsure if it will and how. But to make sense of it all, I think we need to just be kind to each other and to be aware we are the background in each other's lives. And as therapists, we must speak out and up for those that can't, and keep our eyes and ears open for those that need us, and keep our integrity as well as our hearts open to the opportunity within uncertainty. And don't forget to breathe.